So you've got a famous pastor, a big Hollywood movie, a massive megachurch. It sounds like a success story, right? Well, now that very ministry is at the center of a lawsuit, and the allegations are serious. We're talking about a decades-long cover-up of child sexual abuse. In this explainer, we're going to break down the really shocking claims being made against Greg Laurie and Harvest Christian Fellowship. Yeah, just take a second to let that sink in. This quote comes directly from the legal complaint, and it's referring to a man named Paul Haavsgard. Now, this isn't just some random person. The lawsuit says he was a senior pastor at Harvest, specifically sent by the church to start and run children's homes over in Romania back in the late 90s. Okay, so as we dive into all of this, it's really important to stress something. These are allegations. They come from a court filing, the defendants deny them, and this is all something that a court will have to decide. Our job here is just to walk you through what the lawsuit itself actually claims. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at who's involved, then the mission in Romania itself. From there, we'll get into the specific allegations of abuse, a critical investigation that happened in 2004, the alleged cover-up that followed, and finally, the aftermath over the last 20 years. Okay, so let's start with the key figures, the main players named in this lawsuit. First up, you have Greg Laurie. He's one of the defendants. He co-founded Harvest Christian Fellowship, which is a huge megachurch out in California. If his name sounds familiar, it's probably because he's a really prominent figure in the evangelical world, and his life story was just turned into that big hit movie, Jesus Revolution. And then there's the other main defendant, Paul Haavsgard. The court filing says he was a senior pastor at Harvest. He's the one who was handpicked to go to Romania back in 1998 and lead this new mission to help street children, something they called Harvest Homes. And bringing the lawsuit is the plaintiff, Christian Eroahi. He was one of the children who lived in the Harvest Homes. Now, as an adult, he's coming forward alleging that he was a victim of Haavsgard's abuse when he was just a kid. So how did this whole thing even get started? Well, you have to go back to post-communist Romania. This was a time when the country was really struggling with poverty, and tragically, it had a huge population of kids living on the streets. So here's a quick timeline of how things played out, at least according to the complaint. Haavsgard goes over in 98 to start the mission. But get this, within just 1 year, the lawsuit claims the first reports of abuse were already making their way back to the church leadership in California. Christian, the plaintiff, enters the homes in 2000. And then the whole mission isn't shut down right away. It's slowly phased out over years, until it's finally closed for good in 2008. Now let's talk about the money. The complaint alleges that Harvest was sending $17,000 a month directly into Haavsgard's personal bank account. You have to understand, in Romania at that time, that was an absolutely massive amount of money. And the lawsuit claims there were zero financial audits, zero controls over how any of it was being used. So, with all that funding, Haavsgard sets up several of these homes. The lawsuit says he would go out and recruit these incredibly vulnerable children right off the streets, promising them food, shelter, a new life. But the complaint paints a very different picture. It claims that instead of being a safe haven, these homes became what the lawsuit calls a perfect laboratory for abuse and exploitation. And this is where we have to get into the specific allegations of abuse. And a warning, some of these details are pretty disturbing. The court documents describe what they call a pattern of control and systematic exploitation. The lawsuit details a whole range of alleged grooming and abuse tactics. It claims punishments he called spankies would often escalate into sexual assault. It also alleges there was the system of favorites, where some kids would get gifts and special privileges. The complaint goes on to allege that he forced children to watch pornography and even pushed some of the boys into sex work, taking a cut of the money they made. And it wasn't just physical, according to the lawsuit. It alleges there was intense psychological and spiritual manipulation too. He would allegedly tell the children something like, "I know what God wants, and what I want, God wants." I mean, just imagine hearing that as a vulnerable kid with no one else to turn to. It creates this sense of absolute, unquestionable authority. Okay, this all leads up to a really critical moment in 2004. This is the turning point. According to the lawsuit, the rumors and problems got so bad that the leadership back at Harvest finally felt they had to launch an investigation. So, in October of 2004, an audit team sent by Harvest goes to Romania, and the lawsuit says they found conclusive evidence of both abuse and financial mismanagement. So a pastor from California, Richard Schutt, flies over to see the findings for himself. And the head of that audit team gives him this incredibly direct warning. He tells him, Paul needs to be on that plane with you when you leave tomorrow. A clear message, right? But the complaint alleges that that's not what happened. Haavsgard was allowed to stay. So the big question is, why? Why would they allegedly keep him there after a warning like that? Well, the lawsuit claims the decision was all about protecting the church's reputation and its fundraising. It even quotes a senior figure saying something to the effect of, he's the face of the ministry. We can't have him not be part of things. And that alleged decision to keep him on is what the lawsuit says kicked off the next chapter of this story, what it calls a deliberate, multi-year cover-up. The complaint calls this whole strategy a soft landing. Here's what it alleges happened. Haavsgard was never fired, never disciplined, and crucially, never reported to the authorities in either Romania or California. Instead, they just slowly choked the funding to the mission over the next 4 years to kind of quietly shut it down without a big scandal. And when the homes finally did close for good in 2008, the lawsuit alleges Haavsgard walked away with a severance package of around $200,000. All right, so let's fast forward now to the aftermath, the 20 years since that investigation. The lawsuit draws this really stark and powerful contrast between where the key figures ended up. You really have two completely different stories here, according to the filing. On one side, you have Laurie. His ministry continued to grow, he became the subject of a $53 million movie, and lives in a multi-million-dollar home. And then you have the plaintiff, Christian. The lawsuit describes his life after leaving the homes as a devastating struggle with PTSD, alcoholism, self-harm, and even being forced into sex work. And maybe one of the most jarring details in the whole complaint is this quote from Laurie. It was published in 2009. Now think about the timing here. This is 5 years after that internal investigation allegedly confirmed the abuse, and a full year after the mission in Romania was shut down. And he's still publicly praising Haavsgard, saying his life demonstrates the power that just one godly person can have. And really, that brings us right to the heart of this lawsuit. The argument is that this cover-up, which they say was put in place back in 2004, worked. It was successful for 20 years, and that it's only now, today, that these allegations are finally being brought into a U.S. courtroom. So what you have is a lawsuit that lays out this incredible narrative of abuse and concealment spanning decades and continents. Of course, the defendants strongly deny these claims. And now it's up to the courts to weigh all the evidence. It all really boils down to this one central question that's at the heart of this entire case. What is the price of silence?